Welcome everyone to this channel where I will be sharing episode reviews of that 1960s television show that I enjoy so much, Lost in Space. I encourage you to like and subscribe so that you don't miss each new installment as I work my way through all 83 episodes of this wonderful series. Up next, Season 1, Episode 9, The Oasis. Our galactic castaways have been struggling through a drought, and Smith selfishly wastes the last of their drinking water on a shower. Hoping to find a new source of fresh water, the entire party heads out on a search. Smith is not able to carry on and heads back to camp. Meanwhile, John discovers some fruit that may be the answer to their problem. He brings some of it back to camp to be tested, but not before the bloop has nibbled on one of them. Smith arrives back at the Jupiter well after the Robinsons. He sees the fruit out on a table and eats some. Maureen tells him that testing is still in process and it's possible the fruit may be poisonous. Smith, believing that the Robinsons left the fruit out so as to be rid of him, heads off into the wilderness to die alone, taking with him the last working fuel cell that produces drinkable water, expecting to condemn the Robinsons to a fate of their own. The fruit kills neither Smith nor Debbie, but it does make them grow many times normal size. This is a 9th episode, and one that will earn from me my lowest grade yet. Indeed, we will need to go out as far as episode 25, Space Croppers, before there is an episode to which I will assign a lower grade. That said, The Oasis isn't a bad episode. It's just not as good as so many others across the very strong Season 1 of Lost in Space. To me, The Oasis kind of feels like two different halves of the same episode. There's the excellent first half that focuses on the struggle for survival, and then the less than excellent second half after Smith has grown. And I think that's the portion that most fans focus in on when they consider the quality of this episode, The Oasis. In fairness, though, that split actually doesn't occur until we're about 2/3 of the way in, so maybe in total, it's a better episode than we think it is? Let's see as we get on with our story. Our space colonists are struggling through a blistering heat wave. Don and Judy are insulating the water conversion unit, hoping to reduce evaporation of their much-needed and very limited supply of drinking water when Don begins to hear a rumble. It's a planet quake. The quake is felt inside the ship, and John realizes that Judy is still outside. There, stone and rubble are raining down on both Don and Judy. Don tells Judy to get inside the ship for safety while he struggles to complete his connection. Finally, Don also leaps up and runs back to the ship, but stumbles just as a large boulder becomes dislodged, falls, and pins his ankle. John runs out of the ship to help. At first, Don is unresponsive. As he comes to, it is clear that he is in immense pain. Indeed, Mark Goddard does a good job of selling that crushing pain. John grabs a large metal pole to use as a lever, and with all his might relieves just enough pressure for Don to slip his foot from the boulder. Finally free, John helps him up. Smith emerges from the Jupiter and asks if he can help. How can we not smile at John's response? All the more so, Smith's reaction to it.
Yeah. Get his boot.
As John, Maureen, and Judy help Don back inside the ship, they close the hatch with Smith still outside, kind of setting up the overall tone for the rest of this episode. The sun continues to bake the planet. John, making notes in his ship's log, recalls the eccentric orbit of the planet introduced back during the Giants and Hungry Sea episodes. As he says,
"The eccentric orbit of this hostile planet has now confirmed our fears that its sun would soon be a pitiless enemy. The land shrivels under its blinding heat, and the conservation of water has become our gravest problem."
The heat is beginning to take a toll on the entire family. Over a board game, Will and Penny begin to bicker. Maureen asks John, and he agrees to have her give the kids their water ration. Later, John and Don are examining their water conversion unit, and it is experiencing corrosion, leaving only one of these units still active. Don says he checked the underground storage tank only the night before, and they're down to just 24 gallons, what amounts to a 14-day supply. Before cutting rations further, John wants to check the tank again and now discovers that they are actually down to just 2 gallons, leaving only about a 24-hour supply of drinking water. In the background, we see the robot up high. This sets up one of the more comical scenes of the entire series.
I would have kicked you clear into orbit for taking a shower at a time like this.
I couldn't wait another day. I was losing precious body fluids, besides feeling very icky.
How much is left in the tank?
He got it all. There wasn't much to begin with, and my hair is still soaking.
I hope it falls out in bunches.
That remark was uncalled for, Major.
Don't you realize what you've done? You've washed your grubby hide in what is practically the last of our drinking water.
How did you get it out of the tank? Did you steal the spigot?
I did not. I used suction.
Well, that figures. How about that's how you used to sneak gas out of cars when you were a teenager?
I was never a teenager in your sense of the word.
Well, I hope not, because I'd owe all of them an apology if you were.
Look here now.
Now, just a minute. Get your clothes on. I want everyone present at the ship in a meeting in 5 minutes.
Oh, shut up.
That does not compute.
Up to now, comedy in the series has been fairly limited, usually just a quip from Smith here and there, or an exchange between Don and Smith that is as amusing as it is hostile. Here, for pretty much the first time, we have an entire scene that is played entirely for comedy. And for my tastes, this is comedy that works. Both the robot and Smith singing opera as Smith showers. I find it such a funny scene owing mostly to the amount of energy that both Jonathan and Bob May put into their performances. John and Don come running over and grab the hose from the robot, furious that Smith has exhausted the last of their drinking water for a shower. Smith, unapologetic, insists that the shower was a necessity. Before moving on, a couple more thoughts about this scene. First, I have to wonder how Jonathan and Bob prepared for it. They are both singing different things, and it sounds chaotic while also at the same time coming together into something that works. I have to wonder if this was something that they planned and prepared for, if it was rehearsed, or if it was instead really something more spontaneous. Secondly, it's worth noting that this is one of the few times that we actually hear Bob May's voice as the robot instead of Dick Tufeld's. Bob had a very good singing voice, and he was justifiably proud of it. As a consequence, most of the times that we hear the robot singing on the show, that is actually Bob, and this is one of those times. With the decimation of the water supply, John calls an emergency meeting. The situation is dire, and with only one working conversion unit, water will need to be consumed in what he describes as medicinal doses. All efforts need to be poured into finding a fresh source of groundwater. John lays out a chart and describes the existence of a stream that has dried up, but he hopes that if they follow its course, possibly they will discover its source. He also states that they will need to conduct their search during the day, and given the current heat wave, that will be dangerous. From the periphery, indeed not even seated with everyone else, Smith interjects some unhelpful comments. He gets up to leave, and John quickly advises Smith
To start routing. Oh, you'll join us on the march with a bucket in each hand, just like the rest of us.
Everyone is on the march along the dry riverbed in search for water. As always, I love these crane shots revealing just how large the Lost in Space sets were. This expansive view really helps to sell the idea that they are actually on an alien planet. After a time, Smith announces that he can go no further. Will suggests that maybe Smith is too old for this kind of hike, to which Smith responds with his usual sense of indignation. He pleads for some water and Maureen offers him a ration. Then, without any sense of conscience, Smith actually asks if he can have another. Maureen predictably declines his request. John suggests that he try to make it back to camp while everyone else pushes on with their search. After a time, John and Will spot a small pool of water. John climbs down, dips his fingers into the water, and gives it a small smell and taste. He immediately spits it out as it is unsuitable for drinking. Just then, though, some fruits attached to a vine float to the surface. John pulls a few of them and brings them up. Don cuts one open and everyone begins to rejoice, hoping that this fruit may be the solution to their drinking water problem. John reminds everyone not to eat any of this fruit until they have been thoroughly tested back at the ship. Unbeknownst to all, though, Debbie picks one up, scoots off on her own, and begins to eat the untested fruit. In the ship's lab, though hopeful, John is quick to remind everyone not to eat any of this fruit until the test is complete, which could take up to 36 hours. Just then, Maureen realizes they've forgotten about Dr. Smith. Assuming that he made it back to the ship before them, she checks his cabin, but he's not there. Surprised, Maureen takes the elevator up to the main deck to watch for him. A couple of interesting things about this short elevator ride. During my review of Mr. Nobody, I mentioned how the use of the elevator's controls change over time. At this still early stage in the series, we see Maureen take 2 steps to operate the elevator, pushing a button on the railing to close the cage, and then throwing the lever behind her to actually operate the elevator. Before long, unfortunately, we will see the elevator operated by pressing only the buttons on the railing, which leaves the elevator and its controls seeming a bit less authentic. Also, we get a rare perspective of riding up the elevator with Maureen as it passes between floors. The upper and lower levels of the Jupiter 2 were actually on completely different sound stages. But this little bit of creative editing as we follow her from one deck to the other helps to sell the reality of the ship. Arriving on the upper deck, Maureen sees Dr. Smith through the viewport already eating the fruit. Maureen runs out, slaps the fruit from Smith's hands, and tells him not to eat it. Smith isn't understanding her reaction, at first saying that there's plenty of fruit to go around. Maureen tells him that the fruit has not yet been fully tested and may even be poisonous. Everyone else comes running out of the ship to see what is going on, and John chastises Smith for not following rules, but as Smith reasonably points out,
It was lying right here on this table. I was hungry and thirsty. How was I to know that you left it there deliberately? You wanted me to eat it?
Why, that's ridiculous, Smith. We just found that fruit. If you hadn't left us, you'd have known that.
You took advantage of the way I felt to plant them there. You knew they'd be the first thing I'd see.
That's not true.
Smith believes that the Robinsons deliberately poisoned him so as to be rid of him, or as Smith says it,
Is it? I know how you all feel about me. Another mouth to feed, another thirst to quench. Oh, yes, let's get rid of him. This is our chance. That's the way your evil minds worked, wasn't it? No!
Convincing himself that the poison is already taking effect, Smith runs off to the ship in a panic. Maureen asks John if they could somehow neutralize the poison, but as he quite reasonably states, they don't yet even know what it is that they would be trying to neutralize. Resting in his cabin, Smith convinces himself that his time is near. He begins to chastise himself for, as he views it, having been fooled into eating poisonous fruit that was deliberately set out for him. But then, the evil, scheming Smith returns as he swears,
But I won't die alone. Oh, no. They'll pay for this with their lives.
Later that evening, the Robinsons and Don are sitting outside the Jupiter. Maureen went down to check on Smith and discovers that he is neither in his cabin nor anywhere else on the ship. As she states it, he must have been so frightened that he just ran away to die. In the darkness, the family heads out to look for him, but has no luck. Everyone returns and gathers in the ship's galley. John finds that Smith packed a few essentials from his cabin and views that as a positive sign. It is here, though, that Judy begins to raise some valid and probing questions.
But what if it really poisoned him? And he's sure we did it deliberately.
Look, Judy, we can't help what he thinks. Now, he knew as well as we do that we're not supposed to eat anything we find on this planet until it's been thoroughly tested.
But we did leave it lying around. That's why he must have thought it was safe to eat.
Judy, I'm sure you wouldn't have eaten anything without finding out if it was safe or not.
I don't know. Perhaps if I felt the way Dr. Smith did, dehydrated and everything, I might have.
No, Judy, you wouldn't.
Later in the evening, Will with Penny, and then Maureen with Judy, express their concern for Smith. Penny wonders why Smith didn't take the robot for company, as he must be very lonely. Judy struggles with guilt over having recently said some unkind things to Smith, though Maureen reminds her that he wasn't always very likable. Nonetheless, they all miss him, wish he would come back to the ship, and that he ultimately will be okay. Penny has a quick and wonderful scene as she tucks Debbie in for the night, remembering their desperate need for rain, along with her concern for Smith.
You look so beautiful up there, sky. But you'd look more beautiful if you were all dark with clouds, and rain was falling and filling the lakes and rivers and the streams. Not until we find Dr. Smith, though.
We cut to Dr. Smith, who has climbed a small hill. There, he is making a recording of what he describes as his last mortal words. It's a fun and dramatic scene, indeed dramatic to such an extent that it could have come right out of a Shakespearean tragedy. He buries the tape and marks it with a flag. It's all classic Smith, the incredible ego saying that he could have transformed the universe. Even his salute before heading back down the hill, once again, all very classic Smith. Later that night, John, Don, and Will are preparing to head out and continue their search for Smith. Before leaving, Don takes another look at the water conversion unit and discovers that the last working fuel cell, and essentially all of their remaining water, is now missing. Clearly, these things were taken by Smith when he left. Without that fuel cell, our colonists stand little chance of survival. Meanwhile, out in the wilderness among some trees, Smith begins to stumble and ultimately falls lying motionless on the ground. John, Don, and Will continue their search even as daylight breaks. They pause for a small drink, and there's an interesting exchange between the three of them that captures Don's anger and frustration, balanced with John and Will's, and even Don's, humanity.
He won't have enough energy left to swat a fly when I get through with him.
But he may be dead.
Be surprised if I give up with 3 loud cheers, Will.
That's kind of cruel, Don.
Now, what do you call stealing our one good fuel cell, An act of brotherly love?
Here you go, Don.
No,
I think you need it.
I'd rather stay steamed until we catch up with our friendly bull elephant. Alive.
With that, John radios into Maureen for an update. He asks her to check the sample that he has under the microscope, and Maureen advises him that there is some bacterial motion, but it is happening separately, not in clumps, and John receives that as good news. The men return to their search, and only a short time later, Maureen observes that the sample is now beginning to clump, and that is bad news. Penny says she's going to go check on Debbie, and is alarmed to discover that she has grown many times her normal size. Debbie runs up to the front viewport and is jumping around in a playful manner, seemingly unaware of what has happened to her. Understandably, the women wonder if this is what has happened to Debbie, might it also have happened to Dr. Smith? Inexplicably, Maureen elects not to report this discovery to John, feeling that he already has too much on his mind. Meanwhile, the men come upon the flag planted by Smith. Hoping that it might mark where Smith hid the fuel cell, they do a bit of digging only to discover his recording. Noting that they will need to wait until they return to the ship to hear it, they push on with their search. The following morning, we cut to a scene as Smith awakens and celebrates the fact that he is still alive. Instead of describing it, let Smith speak for himself.
I'm alive. I'm alive. I'm alive.
The men spot Smith and approach him, but he turns violent, uprooting a tree and throwing it at them as they dash back behind some rocks. Once more, there are some interesting exchanges between John, Don, and Will.
You can't shoot him.
There may not be another choice, Will.
But he may be hungry as well as thirsty. That's why he's so mad. Shall I offer him something to eat?
He's more likely to eat you than that sandwich.
Dr. Smith and I are friends. Let me talk to him.
All right, Will. But keep your distance. Yeah. Try and persuade him to come back with us. Tell him we want to help him. And remember this, son. I'll have my laser on him at all times. Go.
Will approaches Smith and tries to tell him that he's grown. Smith, ever defiant, is reluctant to accept the news. Once Will is able to persuade him that he is now a giant, Smith begins to break down, recognizing that he will never be able to get back inside the Jupiter, meaning that he will never ever be able to get back home. And even if he could, he would only be seen as a freak. Will does his best to convince Smith that it's not so bad to be big, but it's all in vain. Smith starts to collapse in despair, and John and Don come out to talk, and they offer to try to help him. At some point, John mentions the critical need for the fuel cell, and Smith turns angry, assuming they cared not for him, but only for themselves. Smith lets out a powerful sneeze that blows all three of the men from their feet, at which point they make a break for it and return to the ship. Back at the Jupiter, John announces his conclusion that the fruit has affected the pituitary gland behind the nose, and that this is what has caused the fantastic growth of both Smith and Debbie. The lack of the fuel cell, though, is becoming ever more critical, but the men have no idea how to recover it from Smith. Maureen tells John that she would like to try to persuade Smith to come back to camp. John believes there's no hope of reasoning with him, but Maureen says that she doesn't intend to. Ultimately, she's going to try to stroke Smith's ego and make him feel more comfortable with the circumstances. When Maureen comes upon Smith, she makes it clear that no one sees him as a freak, and that certainly no one is laughing. At first, Smith is all about the impossibilities, no bed big enough, and so on. To each objection, Maureen is clear that there's always a solution. They'll build whatever he needs. Then, getting back to that ego, Maureen begins to compare Smith to the great scientists of medicine for having taken the chance of eating the fruit, describing it as an heroic act for the benefit of others. Somewhat predictably, Smith takes the bait and begins to think that she's right. Maybe he is a hero. Maureen pleads with him to come back to the ship with her. As the men look on from behind some rocks, how can they not be astonished when Smith not only agrees, but offers to retrieve the missing fuel cell. Smith lets out a few more loud sneezes, each one of them knocking Maureen off her feet. Maureen says that the sooner they get Smith back to the ship safely, the better. Back at the Jupiter, Don is reinstalling the fuel cell, and the system once again begins to produce drinkable water. In the background, Smith continues to sneeze. Apparently, Debbie has been sneezing as well, the assumption being that as the fruit impacted the gland behind the nose, it likewise impacted their nasal passages. Will runs over to Smith to tell him the good news about the fuel cell, that they should be able to produce a pint of water per day. Amusingly, the giant Smith despairingly states,
A pint. I'll use it for eye wash. For one eye.
Just then, what everyone wanted most begins to unfold. Dramatic lightning announces the arrival of a rainstorm. John, Don, and Will run into the ship for cover, but as the rain pours down on Smith and Debbie, they shrink back to their normal size. Once Smith realizes what has happened, he emerges from his giant bed, scoops up Debbie, and the two of them make it back to the Jupiter as well. Inside the ship, the Robinsons and Don are celebrating the coming rain. Smith appears at the airlock, and I'll leave it to him to express his satisfaction of having returned to normal size in a way that only Smith can.
Are you all mad? Here you are dancing like savages while I'm being drenched.
But Dr. Smith, do you realize what's happened?
Of course I realize what's happened. But I'm still being drenched and I'll probably get pneumonia.
But you're back to normal size. That's what's important.
Obviously the effect of simple H2O on my system. However, as soon as one of you good people gets me a cup of hot soup and something dried to wear, I might offer up a small prayer of thanks.
This takes us to our next scene, which actually sets up our next episode. I really enjoy the scene, in particular, the dialogue between Smith and Judy, and especially the way each of them deliver their lines. As always, I will withhold my comments on the scene until my review of this next episode, The Sky is Falling, another great one in the series. So with that, let's take a harder look at what we have with this episode, both the good and the bad. The opening scene with Don is exciting. I think Don stays at the equipment, though, far too long to be believable. I know this work was important, and their water supply was already critical, but it still seemed unbelievable to see him continuing to work as rocks literally rained down upon him. That aside, this scene is an exciting way to kick off the episode, including the giggle over Smith being asked to get Don's boot, and Smith's ultimate reaction to that. Then there's the shower scene with the robot. Here too, I have mixed emotions about this one. As much as the early Smith was not above stealing the family's drinking water so as to have it for himself, it's hard to believe that even Smith would waste all but the last of his own drinking water on a shower. I quickly forgive this, though, as I do so love watching him and the robot sing opera together. It makes me laugh out loud every single time, and for my tastes, it's one of the best comedic moments of the entire series. The subsequent scenes are all wonderful, deeply rooted in the struggle for survival. I enjoy watching everyone on the march through different landscapes in search of water. Finding the fruit, working in the lab, John and Don out on their search for Smith. All of these scenes are a lot of fun from an adventure and drama perspective, and some of these scenes do remind us that, at least at this stage in the series, Lost in Space is a science fiction show. Even Judy gets a too rare strong scene when she reasonably questions whether or not they all may be culpable for having left the fruit out for Smith to find. I'll have to say, though, that John's response to Judy doesn't make sense to me, saying that we should not blame this on the drought. But Judy wasn't blaming the drought. She was blaming themselves. As usual, though, this episode's very best moments belong to Smith, carrying on as he comes to believe he was deliberately poisoned, and his farewell speech made while burying a recording. All of this is played wonderfully by Jonathan. It is also worth calling out the sense of humanity that is exhibited throughout this episode. So often, fans wonder how or why the Robinsons put up with Smith, why they didn't banish him or somehow get rid of him. The answer to that question is addressed fully and repeatedly, as each family member recognizes that, with all of his faults, Smith is still a human being. They ultimately care for him, and they wish he would come back to the ship. Of course, the big negative of this episode, the one thing that most doesn't make sense, and the one thing that fans of the series jump on right away when considering this episode, is how could Smith's clothes grow and shrink with him? Yes, I know it's preposterous. That said, we can't have a naked Dr. Smith running around on TV during the family hour on the Tiffany Network, so we'll need to give this very significant issue a pass. I do wish the split screen was handled in a bit less of an obvious manner. There are a few times throughout the series that we have two Smiths in one scene. His Majesty Smith in particular, where the split screen was handled masterfully. I wish more attention was given to that here, as again, it was painfully obvious. That said, the camera work and forced perspectives are all done very well. In my view, the Big Debbie is terrible. Surprisingly, as I understand it, this was performed by a professional ape actor who even had his own suit. The problem is that his suit looked nothing like the chimpanzee that was Debbie, and even his bouncing around just never appeared especially convincing. I guess they were never going to outfit a gorilla with a furry hat and let it run loose on the set, so I guess here too we'll need to give this one a pass. Like so many other episodes, this one suffers from the perennial issue of bad science. It was great to listen to John pontificate on the pituitary gland behind the base of the nose that controls growth, except neither of those things are true. The pituitary gland is actually back in the brain, and it doesn't directly control growth. It essentially manages the function of the body's other glands. So, since it controls other glands, maybe we can say that indirectly at least, it still impacts growth somehow? And I suppose that since our brains are somewhere back way behind our nose, maybe that's still sort of an accurate assessment? Unquestionably, I'm reaching much too far to try to rationalize this. Happily, this show aired long before there was such a thing as Google, and I know that this 6-year-old was far too lazy to look it up in an encyclopedia at the school library, so once more, I'll give this one a pass. At least it sounded like believable science. The conclusion of the Oasis is a bit unsatisfying. Something as simple as rain returned Smith and Debbie to their normal size? That's it? Even if we accept that simple rainwater was the cure, what remains is still a very light and sitcom-y kind of conclusion. It is fun, however, to see everyone celebrate the coming rain. I also always get a smile out of watching Smith react to the circumstances with his typical indignation. I thought I'd also call out one small item of no consequence, but it does always catch my eye when I watch this episode. It is the laser pistol Don has when they are down behind the rocks after they first find Smith. Over the course of the series, I believe there are 2 different sets of laser pistols. There are the black ones from Season 1, which I thought were the coolest looking. The front nozzle of those, however, was fragile and often broke after putting that laser into a holster. Then there were the sleeker looking silver ones used throughout Seasons 2 and 3. These were much sturdier. I had an opportunity to hold a screen-used version of that laser, and it is quite heavy as the barrel is actually rebar, the kind of rebar you would use to reinforce cement. When Don is down behind the rocks, however, he has a completely different laser pistol in his hand, and one that I don't believe ever appears on the show again. I can't help but wonder why. Possibly he was supposed to use one of those fragile Season 1 pistols, and it broke while filming, and maybe this ended up being a spontaneous substitute. Just an oddity that I thought I would call out if you hadn't ever noticed it. Let me take a moment here to note a bit about the evolution of the Smith-Will relationship. During earlier episodes, I spoke about how Will was rather mistrusting of, and even at times hostile towards, Smith. We know the series comes to be built around the 2 of them together, but that's a journey. We will see that journey take some meaningful steps forward in upcoming episodes like The Raft and Wish Upon a Star. In the Oasis, we don't actually see any of those steps forward, but the foundation is already starting to be laid when Will suggests to John and Don that he go out and talk to Smith because, as he says it himself, they are friends. Lastly, some episodes prompt questions about what happens later, after an episode concludes. Here, we can only wonder how John and Don must have reacted when they finally played Smith's recording, in which he announced how he had plotted all of their ends. At the beginning of this review, I noted that the Oasis feels a bit like 2 entirely different episodes. Much of it is dramatic and exciting. The struggle for survival, the hunt for water, finding and testing the fruit, Smith thinking that he has consumed poison. Even his belief that the Robinsons intentionally left it out so as to be rid of him. And ultimately leaving camp to die alone, convinced that he is an unloved man. There's even some fun sprinkled about this first half, like the opera scene. After Smith and Debbie have grown, Oasis seems like a completely different and much less serious episode. The first half of the Oasis is great, the second half a bit less so. Happily, that great first half is really more like the first 2/3, and with that, I can say that I do still enjoy the Oasis quite a bit. It has some problems, but really only a few, and the good stuff is still pretty good. I grade this episode as a B+. That's my lowest grade on any episode so far, and there won't be a lower grade until very late in the first season. Indeed, for the season, I rank this one rather low at only 24th out of 28. Again, this is not a terrible episode when compared to all 83. This low ranking is really more indicative of the extent to which I enjoy so many of the other episodes across all of Season 1. For the full series, I rank the Oasis as 44th, which is just below the midpoint of all 83 episodes. Here, let me share a little on Maureen's perspective as she considers Dr. Smith.
You know, I read somewhere once that people like Dr. Smith are called injustice collectors. Most of them are really very nice when they're not collecting.
If you would like to see the full series, at the time of this recording, it presently airs for free on METV. That said, you can still find the series on DVD. Better still, pick up Lost in Space on Blu-ray. On that set, the image quality has been sharpened, and there is some excellent bonus material, including commentary by some of the cast. Like I said, I'm a fan, and for me at least, the Blu-ray is a must-have. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on the Oasis. One of the things I enjoy most about sharing reviews like this is how different fans perceive each episode quite differently, and I invite you to leave your own perspectives below in the comments. Most of all, I hope you will come back to join me when I review our next episode, The Sky is Falling, a very fun episode that I enjoy quite a lot. Once again, I recommend subscribing so that you don't miss each new installment in the series. Thanks for watching.